It is wonderful to have so many of you on the line from around the world. So good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are. We're very excited to welcome all of you to this webinar. And really, this webinar series was designed to provide our HR partners with the opportunity to gain deeper insight into our programs, as well as the opportunity to meet some of our esteemed faculty. So very excited to be doing that with you today. In terms of an agenda, we'll begin by introducing Professor Sara Beckman, as well as Michael Griffin, who will be leading a conversation with Sara on developing innovative leaders. And then we'll talk a little bit about recent enhancements that we're very excited about to the Leading Innovative Change program. We very much pride ourselves on building our programs based on the feedback that we receive both from you as well as the participants that you send through our programs. And we've done that with Leading Innovative Change and have gotten some really strong feedback coming out of our spring run of programs around those enhancements. So just a little bit about ExecOnline before we dive in. We are a relatively new organization, but we've grown rapidly. We started in 2012 with the vision that we could really redefine how companies think about training and developing their executives, particularly their middle management level of executives that require a unique combination of both quality of programming and also scale. And it's traditionally been very difficult to get both of those things at the same time. Our programs are designed to allow you to offer that for the first time. The best institutions in the world, such as MIT, Berkeley, Columbia, Yale, and IMD, with the programmatic scale that online enables, still through an engaging format. And all of our programs, as many of you know, are certificate programs from these elite business schools. We're headquartered in New York City. We also have offices in Washington, D.C. and San Francisco. And we've actually, at this point, put executives through our programs from 82 countries and about 4,500 executives. And so we continue to be really excited about what we're seeing in terms of the impact that we're hopefully having within your organizations and on your individual executives. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce two people who will be instrumental in this conversation today. First is Professor Sara Beckman, who's a senior lecturer and faculty fellow at UC Berkeley. Sara has a wealth of experience in the area of innovation, has been working with individuals and companies for a long time, helping them really understand how to drive innovation more effectively, both personally as well as within their broader organizations. And Sara is not only dynamic as a faculty member, but she also brings some really strong experience personally, having worked at HP, helping them in cutting-edge innovation development within their organization. And so she brings that experience to this conversation. The other thing I'll say about Sara is that Sara has a very special relationship with ExecOnline. Sara was our first faculty director in the first program that we launched, this program, Leading Innovative Change, and it was instrumental both in its development as well as its continuous improvement. And so in many ways, I can certainly say that ExecOnline would not be where we are today without Professor Beckman. Secondly, I'd also like to introduce Michael Griffin. Michael is our Chief Enterprise Product Officer and is responsible for thinking about the experience of the enterprise at the human resources level and how we can ensure that you're getting the most for your programmatic investments, both in terms of the quality of our programming as well as the set of products and services that we put around our programming to ensure that you're able to effectively deploy those programs into the organization and execute them effectively. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Michael, who will be leading a conversation with Sara to give you some insight into our Innovative Change program. Michael?
Thanks, Stephen, and thank you again, Sara, for joining us and taking part in this conversation today. To echo Stephen's comment, Sara, I think, brings a very unique perspective to the innovation challenge that we're going to be talking about today. She obviously has experience in terms of thought leadership at Berkeley on design thinking innovation, but she also brings a very practical business lens to innovation, having headed change management at a large technology company and having served as an advisor to multiple Silicon Valley companies. And our goal for the conversation is really to draw out that perspective in our conversation today and to provide all the HR leaders who have joined us on the call with some useful insights into how executives can lead innovation more successfully. Innovation is a critical challenge facing our leaders and our organizations today. And what you see here on the slide is some very interesting data from McKinsey on the nature of that challenge. You see here the results of a survey that McKinsey conducted of executives at large organizations. And we thought this would be a useful starting place for our conversation, because it's very clear when you look at the data that there's broad agreement that innovation is critical to success, but at the same time there's very little satisfaction with the current levels of innovation performance at many organizations today. So 84% of executives agreeing that innovation is important for growth strategy. 80% who believe that business models are at risk if innovation can't keep up with the pace of change. However, only 6% are satisfied with innovation performance at their firms. So there's a real gap confronting our organizations and our leaders as well. So Sara, let me pull you in here. Our Leading Innovative Change program starts by really making a case for innovation. Can you talk a little bit about why innovation is so important for leaders today?
Sure, thanks, Michael, and my greetings to all of you as well. It's a great pleasure to have all of you online with us today. So let me throw out, I think there are really three forces that are driving a need for innovation above and beyond what we've had for the last few decades. I know we've talked about innovation for a very long time, but there's an urgency for it today that's driven by three things. The first is that technology has been changing for 30 years or so at an exponential rate. Those of you who work in the high-tech industry know about things like Moore's Law that have caused the doubling of technology every couple of years. And so we've now sort of crossed the knee of the exponential growth curve, if you will, to technology changing at a pace that we have never seen before. And there's lots of evidence of this in things like autonomous vehicles that are radically disrupting all the automotive companies as well as the transportation industry. And there are lots of other examples as well. So technology is a key driver in this change. But the second driver, and this creates some amount of tension for organizations, is that people are expecting that they will participate in experiences, that they will not just buy products or take advantage of services, but that they will increasingly be provided an experience that sits around those products or services. And so the demands of people for what they're receiving from organizations is also changing. And this is a trajectory that was laid out by faculty like Pine and Gilmore some years ago, but we're starting to see companies really having to figure out what it means to deliver a customer experience. So you juxtaposition rapid technology change, which takes one mindset, if you will, to develop that technology and keep on top of it, and this increased demand for customer experiences. You put those two together. That, by the way, requires empathy and deep understanding of humans and the outcomes we wish to achieve in our lives. So trying to put those two together creates tension all by itself. But then, as Michael pointed out, we also are creating all kinds of new business models. So the sharing economy, for example, which was facilitated by technology, is an example of a new opportunity space for growing business models. And so we've now pushed companies, if you think of a Venn diagram with three circles on it, there's rapid technology change, there's an increased desire to have experiences rather than just products or service delivered. And then there's all this opportunity for alternative business models, different ways of making money and engaging with customers. And so the challenge is, how, as corporations, do we look at all three of those circles and identify the opportunities for innovation in them, but most importantly find that sweet spot in the center that allows us to bring those things together while everything is changing at an incredibly rapid pace. So I think that's why we're seeing the kinds of numbers that you're seeing on this chart today, Michael.
Thanks, Sarah. So some very significant changes creating urgency around innovation. I'm curious, what's the payoff for organizations that are able to get after this in a productive way and to be successful in innovating?
Well, I think there's the first way to look at it is the first bubble on the first pie chart on your graph, that that you can't grow without innovating. And so imagine that you're not staying on top of the technology, then the organizations that are will beat you in the marketplace. Imagine that you're not providing the best customer experience as possible, then other organizations that do will gain that market share or win in the marketplace. So arguably we are in a place now where companies that can't innovate, that can't take advantage of these three critical trajectories will simply probably not only not grow, but really struggle to survive. So, you can look at I'll keep the example of the automotive industry. They're all moving to the San Francisco Bay Area now to take advantage of work that's being done at places like Uber and Google and Tesla to understand how to play in an automotive market that has had a long-standing sort of iterative approach to building cars in a different way. So I think at the heart of it, it is what we have to do to survive.
Both growth and survival, so clearly very important. But as the data on the right makes very clear, organizations and leaders really struggle to innovate effectively. Well, I'd love to maybe shift a little bit to talk about the how organizations and how leaders can innovate more effectively. I'm going to advance the slide here to pull up the Berkeley 4-phase innovation cycle. Sarah, I think one of the things that is powerful about the Leading Innovative Change course that you designed with us is that you give executives a very practical framework, a roadmap really, for generating innovative ideas. I'm wondering, could you give folks on the call maybe an overview of this 4-phase cycle?
Sure. So the 4-phase cycle that we use is grounded actually in learning theory, and you might recognize it for those of you who've worked with Six Sigma and total quality management over the years as that kind of sometimes we call it a problem framing and problem solving cycle. Today, people refer to much of what's in this cycle as design thinking. Some people talk about lean startup. All of these are sort of popular terms for an underlying learning process that we go through as individuals and that organizations go through as well. And so the learning process toggles between being out in the concrete world, taking in information about it, experimenting with things in the concrete world, and then operating in our heads, thinking, right, the abstract world, processing ideas and playing with concepts. And then it toggles between doing analysis work, which I sometimes think of simply as the asking why side of the equation, and doing synthesis work, which is really getting to how. And so in that lower left-hand corner, this is what the lean startup people refer to as get out of the building. It's deeply understanding your customers or other stakeholders in the process of delivering things to customers, or internal stakeholders if you're working on an internal innovation project. It's deep understanding of their lives, of the outcomes they're trying to achieve, and what works or doesn't work in their lives. And so that is literally learning how to talk to other people, interview other people. It also can mean collecting data, taking in data. We talk about thick data, which is data about people, observation data, and big data, which is analytical data. But that's all very messy stuff. And so sometimes we have to step back And so we go up into abstract thinking, and we have to say, what's interesting about all of this data? What patterns do we see in it? What can we learn from that data? So, one example we use in the class is Kimberly-Clark, and Kimberly-Clark was really struggling with growth in its diaper business because diapers at the time were thought to be commodity products. And so they went out and spent a bunch of time with parents trying to understand the role of diapers in parents and kids' lives. So interviewed a bunch of parents, interviewed a bunch of daycare centers, etc., to really try to understand what was going on around diapers. And after they got all those stories and inputs from those people, they stepped back from that. So they went out and lived with customers and hung out with them. That's the observation phase. And then they stepped back and they said, what's interesting here? And one of the things they learned is that parents and kids alike think of diapers as clothing, not as waist control bandages, which is how Kimberly-Clark had framed them. And so they got this notion that maybe they could change what diapers looked like. If they're clothing, they could make them in a different way. And the other insight they got is that parents were really nervous about toilet training. So that set them off in thinking differently about the product, that it wasn't just a waist control bandage, but it had something to do with clothing, it had something to do with helping parents through toilet training. So that's all on the why side. That's sometimes we talk about the upper left-hand quadrant here as what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What frame do I want to put around that problem? And in order to more deeply understand a frame or understand a problem, I'm taking a deep dive into my customers' and stakeholders' lives. Then I flip over to the right-hand side of this learning cycle, and on the right-hand side I start to generate ideas. So in the case of the Kimberly-Clark case, they thought of ideas around decorating the diapers, right? When my kids were young, it was the Sesame Street diapers, right? They would put characters on them or that kind of thing. And then they also began to take on this question of how do we help with toilet training, which quite frankly, Kimberly-Clark said, oh my gosh, that's not our job. We make waist control bandages. But they ended up designing Huggies pull-ups. So the pull-on diapers were the result of this deeper insight into what parents were doing around toilet training and diapers. But those were all concepts, and this is a classic problem in organizations that we like to talk a lot about ideas, but at some point you have to make them concrete and put them out in the world again, diving back down into that concrete space and run experiments with them. So the self-driving car that Google has put on the streets is taking a concept, right? We've talked, science fiction has had autonomous vehicles in it forever, but it's taking that and turning it into an actual experiment, putting it out on the street, getting people's reactions to it, finding out what happens. Sadly, with Tesla lately, that's a less happy story. But so this cycle is really about capabilities that one can develop at an individual level, as well as capabilities that organizations need to develop. So empathy is the cornerstone of the lower left-hand corner here of doing concrete why work, because I've got to really be able to put myself in someone else's shoes in order to deeply understand the problem I'm solving. And many of you know that organizations are increasingly developing internal ethnography groups to go out and actually do this customer understanding. Intel, for example, has 100 people working in its internal ethnography group. And so that's get out of the building in lean startup language. it requires both the ability to do active listening, but also the ability to bring that into the organization. Insights, a same notion that there's an individual capability here. How do I step back from messy data and find the things in it that are interesting? This quadrant is perhaps the most difficult, but the most critical of all of the quadrants, in the sense that it is in the work of looking at that messy data that I reframe what I'm doing. So I'm not just in the waste control bandage business, I'm in the help parents with toilet training business, and that's a huge reframe for an organization to really get what the problem is that they have an opportunity to work on for customers. Think about Airbnb today. You know, that's a reframe away from a hotel that doesn't offer the same kind of you are living in this city experience that staying in someone's apartment, particularly if they're there to help you understand the life in that city better. That's a reframe around a deep understanding of what people are looking for in their lives. This is all, again, on the why side. A lot of our organizations tend to hang out over on the how side. And we tend, in this upper right-hand corner, to want to rapidly come up with the answer to the problem, partly because we're trained on standardized tests to do so. So what we try to do in the upper right-hand corner is to, at least for a short period of time, play out a set of options. So now I have this insight that parents want help with their toilet training. What are all the ways I could do that? Right? I could have training seminars, I could have people who go out as toilet trainers, I could have online instruction, etc., right? Oh, and I could have a pull-on diaper, training pants, that would help parents with feeling better about that cycle. So this is partly an individual thing, again, that in the complex world we live in today, there aren't single answers to problems, so I need to be able to be a little more thoughtful about what are my options here. I think good leaders are quick at saying, there are 3 or 4 options here, let me quickly think those through before I choose just one of them. So in this quadrant we talk about diverging and converging, and work with individuals to develop those skills as well as with teams. And then finally, in the lower right-hand corner, this is really about having an ability to experiment. So Google is the company that put an autonomous vehicle on the streets. Why? Because Google has a mindset in the corporation that it's okay to test things that are not finished. And they think those experiments through clearly in a way to do them as safely as possible. But nonetheless, they put something out there, and in the process, they learn a lot about the concrete world that you can't possibly think your way through in your head. I'm just reading a book as a quick aside about Tesla, Nikola Tesla, who designed the AC motor. It turns out that part of the reason he had that one massive invention that made him quite famous for a while, but he tried to finish all of the things in his head. So he lived in that upper kind of right-hand corner, imagining his way to something, and he didn't have a habit of running experiments to find out which of his ideas worked or didn't. So this lower right-hand corner, you know, many of you probably know about Carol Dweck and fixed versus growth mindset and that kind of thing. This is really about being willing to try something and find out if it works or not, as opposed to imagining that you can dot every I and cross every T before you put it out there. And so that's the learning cycle that we use, or the innovation cycle that we use at Berkeley. And again, it's grounded in how people and organizations learn in general, with this layover of tools and skill development that are needed in each of the quadrants to make the whole thing work.
Wonderful. I love the Huggies example and the power of reframing as you make that toggle from the the questions about the why to the what. One other example you've talked about is Shure headphones. I was wondering if you could maybe share with the audience a little bit kind of how that plays out, that example plays out across the innovation cycle.
So this is a good different example, if you will, a little bit from Huggies, in that it doesn't. The Huggies example started with, whoa, we're in trouble. Let's go out and find out what's going on in our marketplace. So it really started in the observation quadrant and then led to some insights that led to the pull-ups idea that led to experimentation with that idea in the marketplace. That is a classic, what people call design thinking process. The Shure process started with, Shure makes microphones. And they supply also the speakers and all of the equipment that's on the stage when rock musicians perform. So you know those wedges that sit across the front of the stage that provide sound back to the performers? Those are all Shure products. And so Shure had this insight that they were causing hearing loss in their customers, in their rock musicians, that rock musicians have more than twice the hearing loss that the normal population has. And so they said, you know, we feel really badly about that, and we have an idea. And that idea is that we could provide basically something that kind of looks like a hearing aid, but provides the same feedback that you would get from that wedge. It provides it directly to the consumer, and so to the rock musician in this case. And so they made a bunch of these. They kind of kludged together these devices, and they had an idea. They put together these devices, and they took them out into the marketplace. They went down into the lower right-hand quadrant, and they experimented. Sometimes we call this displacement research, where we ask a customer to, in this case, use the in-ear device, and paid them to use the device to practice and to perform once. And what they found out as they were doing that experiment is that the rock musicians said, oh no, hearing aids are for old people. I'm a rock musician, I'm a star, and I don't want one of these. So the folks who were doing the research said, in effect, well then what do you want? This research team, it was an externally hired consultancy that did this research. They spent the summer interviewing rock musicians and rock bands. And so now they're heavily in that concrete space, right? They ran an experiment, it didn't work, but they stayed out in the field and said, well then, what is going on out here? And they came back and they said, you know what the rock musicians really want? And this is the insight section. They said they want control over their sound. They want to sound great, number one, right? Sound great, have control over their sound. They want mobility. They want to be able to move around on the stage. And the sort of weekend warrior garage band types, they need portability because they have to pack all their own stuff. And so they learned about this set of outcomes that rock musicians really wanted to achieve, and they said, you know, we can provide that with something called a personal stage monitor. So they basically took the technology they had taken out originally and reframed it, which then ultimately led to redesigning their brand, redesigning all of the backstage equipment that's used to manage stage sound, and then ultimately went back out to market, testing these ideas first as well as the go-to-market strategy. And this has led to not only changing how rock musicians play, but it also has led to, they now make all the little white headphones for Apple because they learned so much about sound and how to hear it and that kind of thing. So they started in kind of a different place in this cycle. They started really more where lean startup starts. Lean startup tends to start with, I have this idea, and then forces you to get out of the building and do 100 interviews until you pivot. So they call the sort of insights box pivoting. So I'm going to change what my business is doing based on the insights that I've gotten from getting out of the building and finding out whether people like my idea or not. So those are sort of two different ways of applying this process that were used in a couple of large companies to really move them ahead and help them find big business opportunities.
Great example. I want to get into some of the specific tools that you provide executives to make progress. Let's take a closer look at that bottom left quadrant, observations. And I think, so you mentioned that empathy is really important at this stage in getting out of the office. One of the techniques that you teach is something called ethnographic interviewing. Can you talk a little bit about what is an ethnographic interview and why is this a useful tool to support innovation?
So ethnographic interviewing is a little different than what I sometimes call expert interviewing. So we are accustomed in our workplaces, and those of you who are HR folks will totally understand this distinction. We're used to talking to each other in a very business-like way, if you will. So, do you have those numbers for me? What do those numbers mean, etc. Ethnographic interviews focus on understanding the other person's life. And that can be life at work. This doesn't imply that I'm going to ask about your marital status or whatever the case might be, but it implies that I'm interested to understand what you do in your job every day. For example, if this is particularly in a B2B setting, what outcomes you're trying to achieve, what tools and techniques you use to achieve those outcomes, and I'm basically looking for gaps or opportunities as I do that work. So I'm asking you to tell me stories about your life, about your experience in the context in which I'm interested in learning about it. So back to the Huggies pull-ups, it was ethnographic interviewing to understand parents and what mattered to them. In short, being a good parent, and what stood in the way of them being a good parent. Well, my neighbor says her kids are toilet trained and mine aren't. I feel like a bad parent. So we're looking for those shared stories, if you will, that you hear across interviewees that lead you to have a different frame or a different insight. So it's just a different way of talking with other people, and we talk in the course about the types of questions you can ask and the types of things you need to do in order to engage in these ethnographic interviews.
In the Huggies example, we're interviewing end customers. Is this a tool that's a head of a function could use for internal customers as well?
Absolutely, and B2B can also use it. So suppose I'm designing a piece of information technology that will be used by the people who do forecasting, either internal to a company or external to a company. Then I need to go out and understand how people do forecasting today, where they get their data, who they share the forecasts with, what happens to them when their forecasts are wrong, etc. So yes, it absolutely works both internally as well as in B2B settings.
As we move from the concrete to the abstract up to insights, I think you mentioned this was one of the harder quadrants to get right. What are some of the tools that organizations and executives can use to generate insights from observations, and even what's the distinction that we make between what an insight is and an observation?
Yeah, so an observation is just simply what you see. What I'm trying to do when I do insight work is I'm in essence trying to get to the why. I might, we use an example in class about why do you take a shower. I could observe people taking showers, but then I might start to ask, why are they taking showers at a given point in time? Like, why do they fit into the person's day when they do? And I might realize that people take showers not only to get clean, but to relax, or to have a little time away from the kids, or to wake up, or whatever the case might be. And so then you begin to think about if the frame around taking a shower is not, I'm here to help people get clean, but it's, I'm here to help people sort of reset, whether it's around waking up or relaxing or whatever. Then I think about massage showers, or those jungle spray showers, or other kinds of designs of showers that have to do not just with getting clean, but with that reset. So what I'm doing is I'm listening to multiple stories. The observation is people just tell me a story. Oh yeah, I shower when I get home from work or whatever, and now I'm beginning to piece together the stories to get to this insight. So one of the tools is to extract, to really understand the shared story. Some of the other tools that we use are things like customer journey mapping. So I'm looking at, in this case, I might look at the person's day and where a shower fits into that day. So I'm trying to get this bigger picture of what's going on around my product or my service. Sometimes we do things like innovation ecosystem mapping. So who are all the players in delivering this experience to the customers? So it might not just be me, like you ride the train, but then you also need a car to get you to the office that you're going to when you get off the train. And I don't have cars, but I'll have a relationship with a rental car agency. So thinking about that innovation ecosystem is another tool that we use at that level, just to give people a broader view of the problem space and what's happening to the customer in that problem space, and then who are all the players involved in that problem space. So those are examples of tools in the insights quadrant.
And once the executives have the insights, then they're turning those into ideas. And you mentioned in that top right quadrant this idea of divergence, convergence.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what that is and maybe talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, we usually take an insight and we turn it into what we call a how might we question. How might we help people relax would be something that might have come out of that showering work, right? So a massage before the shower, or right, I could come up with all kinds of things. So the how might we kind of sits on the arrow going up to abstract. It's the translation of an insight. How might we help parents negotiate toilet training? How might we help rock stars sound great, right? These are all translations of an insight into an opportunity, if you will, a how might we, that then we want to generate a bunch of options around. And what we teach in this space is that you can't diverge and converge at the same time. And I would urge you to think about meetings at work in which somebody throws out an idea, oh, we should try this, and everybody jumps on and critiques it. And then somebody else throws out an idea and everybody critiques it. And what happens is you shut down the idea generation because everybody feels like their idea has just been dismissed. And so the idea with this diverge-converge work is to separate them. And we use things like post-it brainstorming to generate options. So first get all the ideas on the table, and then figure out which ones you want to take forward. And so I'll just tell you, I have our executive MBA students at Berkeley. They have to do a diverge-converge exercise at work as part of their final exam. And a lot of them will write that they felt really uncomfortable about the idea, like we don't really use Post-its at work, or I didn't know if this would work out okay. And a whole bunch of them at the end of their reflection papers will say, people came up to me and said, this was the best meeting I've ever been in. And it's largely because people feel heard. If they have a chance to put their ideas on the table before everybody starts critiquing them, it creates a totally different dynamic in meetings. It involves the team, including introverts or quieter people. It involves the whole team in a very different way. So that's a, sort of a critical aspect of what we talk about in that upper right-hand quadrant, is the simple notion of diverging and converging and not trying to do both at the same time. The other big piece of that quadrant has to do with just being able to imagine alternative futures. And we don't have a lot of time in the program about scenario planning, but I think it's a critical piece of that quadrant as well.
Great. We've got a question coming in about teams, and the question is, how do you organize a team to maximize innovation? How do you think about a team?
That's a really good question. So there's a book called The Difference by Scott Page, in which he goes about, it's a bit of a long read, but in short what he says is, in order to innovate, you need diversity. That in effect, diversity trumps ability on most innovation teams. And he suggests that the diversity is required both in perspective, and so you could argue that it's, when I'm doing that observation work, when I'm watching the customer, if 3 people were doing that observation, they might each take something different away from it because they have different perspectives informed by their own personal experiences in the world. So people bring differences in perspective, and they bring differences in basically the heuristics or the methods they use to solve problems. And so I need on a team diversity in both perspective and problem-solving heuristic. And so the objective is to create these diverse teams and then lead them through the process that we're describing here. We do a lot of work at Berkeley, and I know Stephen and Michael have programs in teaming as well. We have a whole program called Teaming with Diversity that we hook into the project-based classes that happen at Berkeley, and we have a sense for where teams get off the rails in this process. For example, many teams have a preference for living in that upper right-hand corner. In other words, they want to get to answers quickly, and it's sometimes hard to have them step back and say, it looks like 3 of you have very strong feelings about answers, but it's not clear you're actually all working on the same problem, right? Are we working on toilet training for parents, or are we working on odor control and absorbency? And so there are certain challenges that we've learned over the years of doing this design process with teams that are points at which the teams need intervention, meaning to step back and say, what are we trying to accomplish here, and can we do it? Not can we do it, what do we need to do differently in order to be able to do that? And diverge converge is one of the things that teams tend to forget about managing. There's also, like, some teams get stuck in the abstract world. So this is particularly true, sadly, of our business students, because they're very abstract thinkers, and sort of saying to them, hey, you've talked about this long enough now, go make one, go build one, go draw a picture of what you mean. They have to be kind of forced to get around the cycle in that way. So hopefully that helps a little bit. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about on teaming, like how do you reward the team, how do they escalate challenges. We have whole sessions about that.
Great,
But
thanks.
hopefully that gives you a little sense, yeah. Yeah.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for the question. If any others have questions, this would be a great opportunity to pose them. We've gone through the cycle. I want to keep an eye on time here, and I want to make sure we save some time to talk about some of the enhancements that we've made to the program, and then also some upcoming dates. So again, if you have any questions for Sarah on the what we've covered so far, or any aspects of the program, now would be a great time to do it. I would also just add on the team dimension as well that some of our clients send intact teams through our programs. So typically we're sending individual executives who are leading teams through our programs, but one use case we do see as well are intact teams that go through our programs, and they can work on a shared challenge as opposed to an individual a challenge. So I did want to note that as well.
Yeah, I think intact teams, I'll just add on to that. I think that's a really great way to do this course because it allows you to experience the challenges of teaming around the cycle, but it also allows you to really dig into a problem space that you want to work on and actually make progress on it in the 6 weeks. So, yeah.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you so much for sharing your insight and perspective here. I want to shift gears a little bit and just share with the audience a few of the enhancements and design innovations that we've made with your partnership to Leading Innovative Change this spring. We continually invest in our programs over time and improve them. We want to make sure that they're really on the cutting edge, both in terms of the content as well as the design features. We also collect very, very detailed participant feedback after every program and review it very carefully with our instructional design team and our university partners. And as our first program and one of our most popular ones, we've made a number of enhancements to Leading Innovative Change this spring. And we've outlined just a few of them here to give you a sense for some of the more important changes from a design perspective. So we've added animations to foreshadow and reinforce key concepts. We have scenarios that are woven throughout the entire 6-week program to illustrate innovation both for external and internal customers. We've also added video dramatizations showing not just effective techniques but also ineffective techniques to really help solidify the learning concepts for the learners. And this list is by no means exhaustive. There are a number of other enhancements we made, such as recording new introductory videos for the modules and updating instructions for the assignments, but this gives you a sense for some of the bigger changes, and all designed to really continue to maximize the impact of the learning for your organizations and leaders. All right, well, let me turn it back to Stephen at this point, who's going to close us out with an overview of upcoming program dates and some final comments. Stephen?
Great. Thank you very much, Michael, and really appreciate all of you attending. Thank you so much, Professor Beckman, for that great summary. That innovation framework is really powerful as you think about, as Professor Beckman said, both driving individual innovation as well as bringing people together organizationally to innovate at a broader level. And so, as Mike mentioned, each one of our programs runs multiple times over the course of the year. We're currently actually in the midst of our summer 2016 programs, which are our 3-week programs. Those run during the summer, but then every other program run includes each of the 7 programs that we offer. And so you've got multiple opportunities to send your executives through our programs, whether it's Leading Innovative Change or others. The next program run, the next time Leading Innovative Change will be running with the other 6 and 3-week programs is in October, where we'll have a 6-week program run at the beginning of October to about the middle of November. And then we'll do our winter run in February of 2017 and our spring run again in May of 2017. This is part of a broader webinar series, as I mentioned at the outset, that's really designed to give you at the enterprise level a better sense of the programs we offer, as well as a few tidbits, hopefully, that you can take back into your organization and implement with yourself or with your teams on a go-forward basis. So the next webinar that we have is September 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. With Professor Willie Peterson from Columbia that will be talking about a different topic that's of significant interest, which is strategic leadership as part of our leading strategic growth and accelerating and embedding strategic excellence programs, both of which are with Columbia. So very much look forward to that upcoming conversation. Thank you so much for all of your time. And once again, Professor Beckman, thank you for yours. So have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, and hopefully we will see you again at the next installment of our webinar series. Goodbye now.